Well, hello everyone, and welcome to day 4 of the Advent Paint-Along series. Today we are going to be painting this cute festive front door, and I've already got my piece all sketched out. I'm going to leave this on the screen for just a moment. Hopefully you guys were able to print up the template and get that sketched out. I'll go over the supplies that I have. So I have a piece of watercolor paper that's cut down to a 5x7. I've got a pencil here that I use to sketch my piece. I've got some paper towels and some clean water. I happen to find these really cute gingerbread glasses that I've been using for my water. I thought they were super cute. I've got some brushes. I'm going to be using a couple of smaller brushes today. So I've got kind of a medium small and this one, and then a fairly small one. This one does a nice job with little details. You want something that comes to a nice point so you can get some of these edges really nicely. And then I've got my Master's Touch watercolor set over here. I'm just gonna spray my watercolors down really quick so they can kind of get activated and be ready when I need to dip in. Today we're gonna be using a few different browns, a couple of yellows, a number of greens, and a little bit of Payne's gray to create our scene today. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So first we're going to get just a little bit of light wash on the siding of the house. We're gonna use some Payne's gray, which is kind of a slightly bluish gray. I'm gonna use my medium small brush here, and it's fairly diluted. You don't want too saturated of a color. And I'm just gonna wash some horizontal strokes on here. It's gonna kind of help mimic some of the siding. See, it's fairly watered down. And since siding goes sideways, well, most siding, this siding is gonna go sideways. If you want vertical siding, you are more than welcome to make this your own version. So we're just gonna take some brush strokes and lay them down horizontally. I'm not being super picky about the distance apart. And you can go right over your tree sketch because the greens that we're gonna put in later are gonna overpower the light gray that we have here. And then kind of underneath this is gonna be a little bit darker because that tree is gonna cast a shadow against the house. So just the teeniest bit darker down here. And we'll go ahead and do the other side of the house. Again, some fairly diluted grays. Again, when we get to the bottom right behind the tree, we're gonna make that just slightly darker. All right, next we're gonna get the inside of the window panes. And we're gonna be doing just a little bit of color mixing here, kind of along the lines of like a, it's not quite emerald, it's more blue than an emerald. We need just a little bit of that, and we're gonna add in a touch of the Payne's gray, and we're gonna make that a little bit more of a muted green. All right, I'm gonna go to using this smaller brush here. It tends to pick up a little less paint. And I am going to get my window panes wet, just a few at a time. I'm gonna start working on the right hand door. Although if you're watching in the mirrored reflection, it might be on the left side for you. So I'm going to get the bottom section and then inside the wreath for the window panes wet. I'm going to get that muted green that we just created. I'm going to just dab in a few spots in some of these windows. And I don't want to add a lot, because this is just reflection. Glass is kind of a tricky object to paint because it's got all those reflections and refractions and transparency. So it gets a little bit tricky, but don't worry. It'll turn out really pretty in the end. All right, and then I'm gonna go in with some Payne's gray and just touch here and there real lightly, just teeny tiny spots. Maybe along the edge here. And then as we move up to the top, I'm gonna rinse my brush and get it clean. As we move up to the top, there's some lighting up at the top inside the house. So we want this top section to be a little bit warmer than the bottom. That's got some reflection of the wreaths and the trees on the sides of the doors. So we're gonna take just a little bit of yellow ochre. It's kind of this sandy brown color. And we're gonna touch in those top window panes. And then we'll add just a little teeny bit of Van Dyke brown, which is kind of a, think of it as like a brownish gray. All right, we're gonna do the same thing on the other side. Work our way from the top down. Those top panes wet. Go in with the yellow ochre. We've moved a little bit away from the light, so I'm going to use a little bit of Payne's gray and a little bit of the Van Dyke brown. And if they look slightly choppy, that's okay. When you look in a window reflection, there's a lot of different colors going on. All right, let's get the center inside the wreath here. Get some more of that yellow ochre, like there's a light directly behind that part of the door. And finish the bottom of this other door. All right, let's add in some greens over here, like reflecting some of that greenery that's surrounding the door. And then a little bit of Payne's gray to help put some variation in there. All right, next we're gonna get the glow going on in our lanterns. So we're going to take a clean wet brush. We're gonna leave the shape of a light bulb blank, and we're gonna get the rest of this lamp wet, as well as just dab out to the sides, like the light is gonna shine out from that, radiate out from that lamp. All right, let's get some of this yellow ochre, kind of dab it in real gently, and it'll slowly blend into those little areas that we just wetted. Not puddles of water, just barely damp. And then we'll also go in with a little bit of this yellow. It's like a warm yellow. You don't want like a lemon yellow. That's going to have a little bit too cool of a tone. But this nice bright yellow is perfect. Going to help get another, just a little bit of nice warm glowy tones here. And if it seems like it's too harsh of a line, you can always just kind of soften with a clean damp brush over there. All right, next we are going to add in the frame around our door. And I'm going to be using a variety of browns for this. I'm going to start off with a medium, very neutral brown. We needed to wait till our siding was dry before we moved on to this part. So I'm kind of going to work in sections so we can keep some of the wood grain going. So I've got the base layer of a medium brown. I'm going to slowly, in the direction that the wood would be going, add a few streaks of other colors of brown, just to give that nice variation. Kind of a nice little wood grain going on there. All right, let's move to the side of the door here. We'll do this section right next to the door. And this we're gonna skip as much as we can, going behind the tree branches. We kind of go in between them because this brown is gonna be kind of competing with that green, and we don't want too much of that like peeking through, since watercolors are fairly transparent. in with your other browns. Add some of that wood grain. We're gonna make it vertical this time because the board's running up and down. Might have to let it dry just a bit before we finish adding the wood grain. So I'll move on to the other side of the door. All right, going with our other browns, add some wood grain. It's still just a wee bit too damp, so we'll go back over to the other side. All right, let's move on to the top, across the top of the door part. And a little bit of the other browns for some dimension and that wood grain. All right. Next, we're going to move into finishing off these sconces. And we're going to use, again, some of the brown. We want a somewhat watered down, not too concentrated. We're going to add a little bit too dark. We're going to add some of the shadows and stuff in a second. So we just want to get our undercolor on, really. It's the fun thing about watercolors, they layer, they have such a transparency to them. And as you layer, you create a very nice depth in the color. All right, while that first underlayer dries, we're gonna work on the little pots that our trees are in. So we're gonna use a little bit of the Van Dyke brown, fairly watered down. So I'm just gonna start by painting just a little bit of a outline and then a shadow underneath the pot. And I'm going to clean my brush and use that clean, damp brush to soften that line. It'll help create a little bit of a shadow around the side, and then you've got a shadow under your tree, and then just the tiniest little spot of shadow underneath the edge of your pot. So I'll go ahead and do the other side, around the sides, the bottom, a heavier brush stroke underneath your tree. And then the light is coming this way, so we have a highlight on this side of our pot, on this one, and the shadow over here. So we're going to stay consistent with that and keep this shadow on the same side of this pot. Go in with the clean, damp brush again and soften that shadow up. Now I'm going to use my tiny brush, and we're going to kind of help create a little definition around our door here. So I'm going to get my real nice small brush. I'm going to go into the Payne's Gray. And I'm going to do just a little wipe on my tray. And as I pull back, I'm going to twist my brush and pull back so I get that nice real point on my brush, because we're going to be doing a lot of teeny tiny detail work here along the edges of our door, helping to create just the definition around those window panes and the door crack and all that kind of stuff. So we want to have a nice fine line. So I'm going to go and outline. You don't want it too watered down, because that won't give you enough, definition and color. I'm going to go ahead and outline all of these window panes. It just helps if you especially if you had maybe a misstep with your water that you put in when we were doing the reflections in the glass, and your lines weren't exactly nice and smooth and straight, like this one down here, that's pretty jagged. This will help kind of clean that up and help it look more uniform and nice and straight. Just make sure when you're doing this, you don't drag your hand through your pots that your trees are in if they're still wet. I find that doing all the same direction lines at once seems to be a little bit faster than trying to do all one window pane at a time. All right, I'm going to move on to the other door. Hey, Brandy. It's nice to see you on. Welcome. I don't always get to see what's going on the phone, like comments and... Welcome, Ari. It's hard to see because the phone is facing down, so I don't get to see all the comments. All right, we're almost done outlining these window panes. And next I'm going to use that same Payne's gray to add some little details around the door. We're going to paint around the door jamb. If you feel like it's easier if you rotate your painting as you're going, you can always do that. There are some people that find it helpful if they're having a problem with getting something to look right in their painting. Sometimes they'll even paint it upside down for a period of time. Sometimes it just helps with your perspective. And sometimes it helps so you don't rub your hand through some of your wet paint. All right, get the little panels in the bottom section of the door outlined. And then the center right here where the two doors come together, we'll get that. And let's get the handles on our door. We're going to use some Van Dyke brown. Again, you're going to want to twist and pull back on your brush so you get that nice point. You want to make sure you get some of these little details. I'm just going to outline my handles, and then I'm going to clean my brush and use my clean damp brush to kind of soften the inside so you've got a little bit of shadow and dimension in your handles, like they've got a little bit of, you know, popping out, got that curvature to them. All right, let's use that Van Dyke brown again, and we're gonna do the detail work on our lamps. So I'm just gonna outline some of this, and then on the side that's got the shadow, which is, for me, is my right side. And then underneath, because these lamps are lit, I'm gonna add just a little bit of shadow. And then I use a little bit of a medium brown to add another little dimension of brown in here. So I've got the Van Dyke brown. Into my little reddish brown here. That one was a little bit strong. All right, now we're gonna add the little threshold here. It's gonna be this little stripe that we kind of left blank underneath the door. I'm using the Van Dyke brown. And really quickly before we get to the fun part, which is gonna just make this whole piece pop and pull right together, I'm gonna add just a bit of a shadow. I'm using my Payne's gray because I want a nice kind of neutral gray. We're gonna add just this little bit of a shadow underneath our potted trees here. And I'm gonna go back to using my medium small, or my medium brush. I'm gonna go into an olive green. I don't want it too, I want it kind of diluted because we're gonna build in color as we go. Make sure it's not too strong. I'm gonna start with the wreaths. I'm just gonna paint the whole wreath. Make sure you add those, these are not gonna be perfectly round. You don't want them perfectly round because that kind of, you know, all the tree branches or your pine branches are kind of poking out here and there. So you want to just pull that color out just so you have a little bit of a, like a sawtooth kind of look around it. I'm gonna go in and do the other wreath. And while these are still wet, I'm gonna dab into the olive green and get a little bit of a concentrated. So we've got the shadow on this side. So on the inside of your wreath, it's gonna be over here. And on the outside of your wreath, it's gonna be over here. So we're gonna add that in. That just helps create some of the shadow. All right, and get it just a little bit diluted again. And we're gonna go right into our trees here on the side. Fun thing about these are they don't have to be perfect, and if you mess up, you don't have to stay in the lines. It's kind of a forgiving thing. No trees are, you know, perfectly uniform in there, unless you have somebody that just trimmed the trees. So a little bit of variation in how long your branches are makes it a little bit more interesting. And see, you can't even see those gray lines that we put in at the beginning. They just blended right into the tree. Now that they're still a little wet, we're gonna go in and just more heavily on this side because this is the shadow side again. Just make short little strokes. They're gonna help give you a nice little definition in your branches. Over here, make them a little bit more lighter and a little more sparse, since it's the lighter side of the tree. And vary how concentrated your color is. It just creates a little bit more like depth and definition in some of your branches. You don't want your tree to be just a solid blob. You want to show some of that definition of the branches coming out. And so we'll move on to the other one. Getting heavier on this side. If you need a little bit more water, I need a little more water in my brush. Again, go back in here and there with a little bit more concentrated. All right, I'm going to use the same brush and just a lighter concentration to, that one came out too tight or too dark. To just add a little bit of, just do little teeny tiny, think of it like sprinkles. Little sprinkles, little tiny touches and pulls to help create those little kind of pine branches on our wreath. And as a very final touch, it was not sketched out in the thing, but it's fairly easy to add. So if you want to add a doormat, I'm going to use the Van Dyke Brown. I'm going to outline for perspective. When something goes off into the distance, it gets narrower, and like if you're looking down the road further away from you gets narrower and wider as it gets closer to you. So we're going to use that same idea with perspective to make the section of the mat that's closer to the door more narrow. And as it comes towards you, it gets a little wider. So I'm just going to outline, think of it as a trapezoid. My kids are doing shapes in math right now, so it's a fairly diluted. And just a little bit of the yellow ochre, so you get a little kind of a jute look here. So just a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of that Van Dyke Brown, kind of pull it across, mix it through. And you have a nice little doormat right there in front of your door. When it's dry, if you wanted to write something on it, like welcome or something festive to go with the season, you could always do that. And because we don't want that floating in the air, I'm going to go in with the Payne's gray to just add the tiniest little bit of a shadow around that. That way it doesn't look like it's just floating there in midair. All right, and once you have your picture all painted, I like to sign mine, and I know some people say date it or don't date it. Personally, I like to date mine. And the reason is, as I continue to paint on, I can look back through the years and evaluate where I've come, and see improvements throughout the years or just changes in style or that sort of thing. So I just put the year number, but you are welcome to do whatever you want. Also, I've found that if you do not like your signature in paint, I've found that these little micron pens, they are waterproof and fade proof. They've got archival ink in them. So like if you ever like to do ink and watercolor paintings, you can sketch with this first, outline things with this first, and watercolor over it, and it won't bleed on you. So if you feel more comfortable signing with one of these types of pens, that's always an option as well. I just wanted to share something that I saw today. There was a Bible verse. It was from Romans 12, and it talked about just being welcoming to people. And these front doors just reminded me of that, just being welcoming to people, especially during the holidays. It's a time that, you know, there's a lot of festivities and parties and family gatherings and friend gatherings going on. And just to be welcoming and hospitable to those around you. So I just wanted to share that.